How's it going, fellow starlings? Welcome to my Stargirl Season 2 chapter, or should I say Episode 8 review, breakdown, and recap. And Eclipso is very much so on his way to torturing more and more souls. As of the end of Episode 7, we got a little bit of a foreshadowing of mini Bruce Gordon outside of Beth Chapel's window, and we all knew that she'd be the next target, but I didn't actually see Eclipso going after Rick as well. It seems that he's really trying to make all the rounds, so I would love to know all of your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, your theories and whatnot, but let's get right into this breakdown. Before we do though, give it a like if you do go on to enjoy the video, and make sure you are subscribed if you aren't subscribed already. A lot of you aren't subscribed to the channel despite you coming back week after week, so hey, if you have a YouTube channel, why not click subscribe? It saves you from having to type my name in the search bar, I suppose, but let's get into this. The very beginning of the episode picked up with Rick's teacher going to see him and still apologize for the way she judged him about cheating on the test. I was thinking in my notes, like, oh, so it seems that they were going somewhere with that story, because in the early episodes of this season, I noticed those isolated scenes with Rick, and I knew what they were going for, like, oh, we're just gonna judge the guy before, you know, but I didn't know if it was going to actually go anywhere, but it was, in the sense that she was trying to give him some college brochures and whatnot, but then we got reacquainted with freaking Rick's uncle again. I totally forgot about that guy. I don't know why. Something in my head thought something happened to him last season, but no, he's still there. Still such a jerk, such an asshole, to put it bluntly. And he says that Rick will end up in jail before he ends up in college, which is somewhat a bit of a foreshadowing to the way things ended this episode, with him literally leaving in this episode in a police car. But I feel like what we saw next with Rick walking in the woods, I really like the Grundy storyline. It kind of took a bit of a turn to where it wasn't Grundy this episode, and obviously we will get into that, but at least initially, I'm sure this first scene was a real scene with him and Grundy. Later on in the episode, those scenes weren't the real ones, so to speak. But this particular scene between Grundy and Rick that we saw was really, I don't know, some people may not take out of it what they probably intended, but I definitely did. I've been quite looking forward to this storyline of Rick not just seeing the monster in Grundy, even though that's quite the shame. He kind of did see that in Grundy at the end, even though it was a bit of a trick. But the essence of the story is to not view him like a monster. Like, some people also have that same perception of Rick. Granted, that's a bit hyperbolic, considering the teacher doesn't exactly view him as a monster, but the takeaway is this judgmental side of it. He was really just used by the Injustice Society of America as a tool, as a weapon. They manipulated Grundy himself. He's not exactly the smartest dog, shall we say, because I guess they keep referencing a comparison to a dog with Grundy. But yeah, also just the acting as well. I feel like the performance in this particular scene was really, really good. It took me by surprise. Not saying that Cameron Gellman, who plays Rick Tyler, is bad or anything, but I just didn't expect that kind of outlet of emotions in that moment. It was just a moment where you kind of saw all of this pent-up emotion in Rick come out, and that is when we had Solomon Grundy walking out, and he reveals himself right before Rick. Finally, this moment we've been waiting for all season, these two actually coming together after the mini teasers of Rick feeding him. But slowly but surely throughout the episode, they eventually end up talking. He talks about this old dog, somewhat getting into what we were getting into a second ago with this kind of judgmental aspect of treating someone like Grundy bad, and then as soon as, you know, Rick gave his old dog a new life with new owners, he was a completely different dog, and you can take out of that, well, I wonder if people treated Grundy differently, it would probably end up the same way. And lo and behold, Grundy literally reached out and held Rick's back, gave it a little pat, showing that he does, this is kind of the weird thing, he does probably understand what you're saying, and as we see at the very end of the episode where he literally said the word friend, he's just a little bit slow. Later on, as Rick was leaving the woods after having some hangout time with Grundy, this is where we hear on the Blue Valley radio that the big bear in the woods that they've been teasing all of this time from the Blue Valley citizen perspective, they need to take care of it now, children play in those woods or whatever, so they're going to hunt the bear, and a bunch of hunters' trucks are there, and they get their rifles out, and obviously this really isn't looking good. But what I do like about what this episode did is that it was very obvious from the get-go, especially when Beth Chapel was talking to her parents with the maggots and whatnot that she was being trolled by Eclipso. But with the way the Rick stuff went down, it was more subtle until it obviously got to such a peak point where we could tell it was Eclipso trolling. But I like how in this episode they gave us the obvious side of Eclipso trolling Beth as younger Bruce Gordon and whatnot, but with Eclipso and Rick, that was happening the whole time more or less, but we didn't realize it up until a certain point. Meanwhile, at Courtney's though, we're somewhat reflecting over the Yolanda situation. She's talking to her family about it, and they're saying it's not her fault. And speaking of Yolanda, literally the doorbell rings, and there's a little bag left behind with Wildcat's suit in it. As we spoke about at the end of last episode, she's most certainly hung up the suit. I mean, her mother's even gone as far to drop her job at the diner and stuff, so Yolanda is quite out the picture. And I was speculating at the end of last episode how long, and obviously she will be Wildcat again, it's not like, well, I'd be very surprised if this was it, you know, but I was just wondering how long are they going to bench her for? What situation is going to bring her out of the fold? Is it going to be a Eclipso situation where she feels like she has to help if one of her friends are in danger, or are we going to get Jenny coming back in, the new Green Lantern, and maybe she's going to take some screen time? Because that's a mystery in of itself. They've kind of very much so benched Jenny, who's probably looking for her brother this whole time. But yeah, I would love to know your thoughts and predictions on the return of Yolanda. I like how when we pick up with Beth again, we see a scene of her trying to access the goggles, or should I say the confidential files from the JSA. They're still working through the fact that there are some files that are confidential to do with Eclipso that are being hidden from the team, and it's just like, why would the JSA, if you remember that line from Beth quite a few episodes back, have confidential files? You know, if you're in the JSA, surely everyone would have access, but clearly there's a secret that is really meant to be buried here, and that is the very one that Pat's been teasing to the audience through what he's told Barbara, with how the kids will never be the same again. None of them will if they learn what the JSA's involvement was before with regards to Eclipso. Now, we've been talking about that quite a lot on this channel, episode to episode, but clearly what they're showing here is that Beth is still trying to crack that somehow, and what I think that's going to foreshadow is that the way we're going to learn about the secret is actually through Beth cracking that file. Otherwise, if it came out in any other way, I feel like this constant refresher of showing that she's trying to access the confidential files on the JSA database, it would just mean nothing. I feel like she's got to be the one. We have a conversation take place again with Dr. Charles McNider and Beth, where he's asking, who is Beth? She asks, are you a ghost? And he says, clinically speaking, I am alive. So he is literally alive in the Shadowlands. He's just not really in this realm of Earth. He goes on to say that you have my original goggles. The two of them must be connecting, most likely because the shadow barrier has been breached. Now, what does he mean by that? So if they didn't connect before, that means the shadow barrier of the Shadowlands was not breached. Obviously, that's the most obvious logical, you know, thing we can take out of it. But that means it has been breached. And what does that even mean in of itself? We know that Shade gets his powers from the Shadowlands, and that from the line that Eclipso said with how your powers come from my home or whatever, you know, what's been breached? Is it because he's come out the diamond and the fact that he may be in tune with his own home area? Like, that means it's breached? Is the Shade using his powers continuously, meaning that it's breached? But that doesn't make sense because the Shade's always had access, well, ever since he's got powers, that is, to the Shadowlands. So yeah, maybe I'm looking too deep into this line, but it's just piqued my curiosity that he's put together the fact that we must be connecting through the two goggles because the shadow barrier has been breached. I know I keep going on about it, but I would love to know your ideas behind what that line actually means. Another thing that piqued my curiosity is when Dr. McNider says, oh, I think they see me, I need to keep moving. Who? Who can see him? Maybe he's talking about the shadow specters from the Shadowlands. Specters, you know, kind of these beings, if you will. Maybe they are the very hands that were being summoned from the Shade when the JSA were getting their asses handed to them that one time at the tea party, if you will. Maybe the very hands that the Shade summons with his powers aren't just like a kind of expression of his hands using the powers, but maybe in actuality what he's doing is using the beings from the Shadowlands, and that's how those hands appear, and maybe those are the things that are watching Charles in this moment. And that's when we see a little cheeky Eclipso face in the reflection of the laptop top screen. I don't know why, that made me laugh more than just feeling a bit spooked out, which then leads us to the next Beth Chapel scene of her parents finally coming to talk about the divorce. But as we later learn, this is literally all in Beth's head. Eclipso's abilities give him this kind of perception as to what you're most insecure, paranoid, fearful about. So what does he do with Beth? That is to project the divorce and everything like that as a result of Beth herself. But obviously, we later learned none of this was real, and it was just kind of a way of really trying to crack Beth so she would be ripe, if you will, to absorb her soul, because that's what Eclipso is after at the end of the day. He doesn't want to straight up absorb a soul when there is no trolling that has been done. He needs to troll a little bit, kind of, you know, marinate it in the background, so to speak, through the trolling, and that is when the soul will be ready to, well, yeah, be absorbed the way we've seen before in the past several episodes. When we had Courtney go down to her basement and talk to the staff with, you know, she put Wildcat's gear down there as well, I thought, oh, are we actually going to get onto the staff fixing stuff? It seems that we haven't quite got there yet in this episode, because if you've been watching me every week, I've been pondering about the way they might kind of rejuvenate the staff and recharge it. And I know Pat said later, as if we've heard this line before, but I'm pretty sure we haven't, because I feel like I'd remember, but he says, you know, don't you remember? The staff has the ability to recharge itself or whatever, but it's like, well, we haven't heard that. But what we have heard with what I've been talking about in the previous reviews that I've done is that we know Ted Knight built the staff, and he may not be around anymore, but we do have another character who is literally having the slowest burn of an arc this season so far, making his way back to Blue Valley, well, as he learns where Pat is, and that is Sylvester Pemberton. Now, we have no idea if this is the real Sylvester, but bottom line here is somebody, if he is the real one, if anyone out of everyone would be able to fix the staff or have a bit of knowledge as to how you can charge it or turbocharge it, that would be Starman Sylvester Pemberton. But clearly the staff is trying to recharge itself in the meantime, and we're gonna have to wait to see if we do learn a little bit more about the lore of the staff and its creation in this iteration. And I do feel like we are going to get that from Sylvester whenever he does actually rock up in town. But moving onwards, we do have Courtney call the staff a name, and that is Cosmo. I love that. Courtney is right, though, because she's saying, you know, we can't just really wait around and hope that things get better, hope that the staff gets better, just kind of hope that things fix themselves. That's not really how the real world works. Pat then tries to reassure her by saying, you know, the JSA were all about being ready at the right time, not rushing in totally disorganized. But as we can understand Courtney's perspective, things are derailing more than ever, really, with arguably the biggest threat they've ever faced being out there. You know, Yolanda quit, Eclipso is free, things are out of control, and she feels completely useless. The staff is completely devoid of life at the minute, can only manage a couple of charges, not to mention the end of the episode, the freaking hourglass is destroyed and Hourman's out of the picture. So, like, this is bad. I do like, despite it being a slow burner story, and I know I'm jumping to the end, I do feel like they are curating this story in a sensible way. Like, you know, fracturing the team slowly but surely through a villain, and the way they're handling it is definitely setting up for a story where it's like, well, how do we defeat this man if we are more fractured? Well, not man, but demon thing, if we're more fractured than we've ever been. It was in this moment where Rick rings Pat for his help because of the Hunter situation, and that's when obviously Pat and Courtney were like, what? Okay, we're gonna help, but like, why haven't you told us about Grundy? Why would you keep a secret like that? But before we continue with that story, we do have Beth enter Courtney's house, but really she's never left her house the entire time. But this is a massive Eclipso trip, let me put it that way. She's getting trolled by mini Bruce Gordon there. He's a very, very racist Eclipso as well. You know, it does make sense, because right here in this part of the episode, he's trying, what's he trying to do? We know what Eclipso does, tries to capitalize on the scrutiny, the insecurities, the everything that you're fearful of, basically. And not only does Beth obviously not only has she endured these insecurities of not feeling like she's worthy or good enough, you know, the staff chose Courtney, as Eclipso said, Court chose Yolanda, Rick's dad chose him, but no one chose you. But also, she's also endured a lot of discrimination throughout her life, so that's why Eclipso says things like, you know, I thought you people were athletic, I guess some of the stereotypes are wrong, or whatever. You know, I did find that moment where she says racist, and then Eclipso almost got annoyed by that. It was like, ree! And then she just got launched back into the cupboard. But the main takeaway of that is it is definitely something that is relevant, and I don't think this is woke. I know some people will think it is, but at the end of the day, it does make sense for Eclipso to lean into something like this when that's something that Beth has had to deal with her whole entire life, very, very likely. But what they achieved with a nice mirroring end result is that she literally got added into the database for the JSA when she refused Eclipso, stood up to him and was like, no, screw you, you can say all this to me all you want, but doesn't mean shit, man. Like, I'm the new Dr. Midnight. And it was a strong moment for Beth. What I loved about this moment when Eclipso was saying, you know, admit your fear, your envy, your anger, he's getting very frustrated with her because it's just not working. It's like, as we've kind of learned, that he needs something to kind of be struggling in Beth in this moment for him to be able to absorb her soul. But if she's not giving any leeway there, well, then he can't really feast on her soul the way he wants to, because it won't be kind of, you know, as I said earlier, ripe for the taking. He needs her to submit to his terrorizing ways. But it seems as though Eclipso succeeded with one, but not the other. And this is what I mean about the subtlety of actually him trolling two characters this episode, where we thought maybe he might be successful or trying to be with Beth. We had our blinders up, or at least the episode tried to get that across with Rick, because as we learned with him, things were getting very, very messy. Rick catches up with Grundy, and he learns from some of the hunters just before this that there's a 10-year-old girl who's been taken from a horse farm or whatever, and she's dead in the water. Now, I'm pretty sure when we saw Courtney and Pat catch up, which is when Rick had already run off, you know, very, very angry with Grundy, feeling disgusted and betrayed almost in his confidence in that he's placed in Grundy. Well, that 10-year-old girl was actually Charles McNider's daughter, Rebecca McNider, and obviously she wasn't even real. She opened her eyes and disappeared, and I'm pretty sure that is the girl's same outfit and whatnot, but regardless, it was kind of already too late by this point, because after helping Grundy and everything like that, after believing he isn't a monster, I felt like this was the most tasteful thing in the whole episode, with how we saw Rick call him a monster, which was a deep gut punching thing, like, even for me, because I felt bad, because it was like, they had just got somewhere, and it was this whole thing about not viewing him as a monster to ultimately calling him a monster after what he thought Grundy did. And we see that Rick has flipped over his hourglass and is beating the living shit out of Grundy. Now, there's something I have a little bit of an issue with here. Call it a nitpick, that's fine, because I do think you're meant to suspend your disbelief here, I suppose. But when we've seen Rick use his hourglass, he's given super strength, right? To literally slightly punch a car, it will have a massive ripple dent in it and go about 1.5 meters to 2 meters into the road. We've seen that before. We've seen the damage he does with the super strength. And when he was unleashing on Grundy, you don't even have to assume that he was holding back. He wasn't. He was going hard. So when it's revealed that that was just an illusion and Pat actually saw who he was beating the crap out of, I'm sorry, it does slightly break it a bit for me when that was his uncle. So beforehand, when we've seen Hourman face Grundy, Solomon Grundy is a huge being in of himself with super strength, and he can take a lot as well, you know, as in he can take punches and damage. But a human being, you know, when in fact this was actually his uncle, with the context in mind that Rick wasn't holding back. Bang, bang, you know, as I said, the damage that he's done to a metal car. Imagine one of those punches going in my skull or your skull, an ordinary human, that would have already obliterated him. So I know you may get annoyed by this criticism, but it is valid, whether you like it or not. I know they said he was in critical condition, but that still doesn't really hold up, because look at the logic here. He would have been mush peas, literally. Like the punching that his uncle endured from a super strength Hourman, I don't really need to repeat anymore from the context that we've seen Hourman's power provide before. His uncle would be mashed potato. But even with that said and done, as I said, it wasn't like a breaking thing for me, because it was, you know, it's not like there was an abundance of nitpicks in this episode, which would then make it a bit of an issue. But, you know, taking it out the way, I was still very engrossed in this. I was still very into it. I felt very sad for both parties here. Courtney gets to the point where she literally has to cosmic blast Rick, and this is the most mind-blowing thing, to be honest, like I didn't expect. And that's when Rick, you know, through completely being depleted of almost anything, any word you could come up with, he grabs the hourglass and smashes it into the ground. And, you know, that's like another thing, like Beth's broken goggles. At least they're half working, but how is Rick going to recreate the hourglass? Now, obviously, they will kind of go into that, but you can see what they're doing here. Wildcat's gone. Beth, on the other hand, it's good contrast here in a way. It's like Beth's found herself and has come through the trolling, whereas Rick, Eclipso, has succeeded and has destroyed himself and has destroyed the mantle of Hourman. Do you know what I mean? So I like what they were going for there. Eclipso is most certainly winning, and I'm just looking forward to maybe seeing Rick go into the journals of his father again, maybe learning on how to recreate the hourglass, and who knows, maybe he'll modify it this time to make it more than a freaking hour. I don't know. There's opportunity for things like that. But also, I don't know how he's going to get out of this in a logistical way, because he, you know, that was attempted murder, and he's being carted off in a police car. So yeah, unless he's out on bail or something, like I genuinely don't know how they're going to come out of this one, but it might be one of those things in a TV show where they kind of do skip over the logic. I know that's a bit of an assumption from me, but I genuinely, legally don't know how he's going to get out of this. I do have one or two ideas, and that is with, you know, we pan with the camera with the emergency services leaving, and we see Grundy say, "Friend." I know some people may not care about that, but for me, it does hit me, I do admit. For all we know, Grundy might try break him out of prison, and we could have a situation where he's kind of living on the run, but I don't know if they will go down that route, because that will provide problems in of itself. Other than that, at the very end, we have a nice moment with Beth and her parents, and I believe we have a scene with Barb and Mike. Now, remind me, I think this is the first time that Mike calls Barbara Mum, which is quite nice. That's when we see some icicles form. So first the window gets frosted over and icicles literally form. Now this could be the weather that Eclipso is causing, but that I would give that like 5% and then 95% likelihood that this is a continuation, a very small teaser of Cameron Marquand still coming into his powers. Obviously, logistically, it might not make sense. If he's literally not nearby, then why would Courtney's window freeze over? Unless he was kind of doing the weird stalkery thing and hanging out nearby. But I guess it was just for dramatic effect. But you would have thought if it pertained to Icicle, they would have done a fleeting Icicle theme, but they didn't. But I don't know what could be more depictive of Icicle other than icicles literally forming, hinting and foreshadowing Icicle Jr., which I really hope that it means they're picking up with that maybe next episode. We need to see what will happen with Cameron after that paintbrush got frozen. And I think that's everything, guys. So overall, I really enjoyed this episode. As I said at the end of my last review, I do feel like things need to pick up a bit, like something big somewhat needs to happen. This episode was more entertaining to me, I would say, but I do feel like Stargirl needs to give us a bit of an oomph though. Despite me still maintaining my stance that the quality is still there this season, I do feel like, you know, maybe, and I will repeat myself from the end of my last week's review at the very end of the video, and where I said that I think the show thinks that they've given us this impactful moment to liken it to that of the Wizard dying, the Wizard's son dying, Henry Jr. or whatever, not Henry Allen. Maybe they thought that through taking away Cindy in that episode, we thought she died, but I don't believe that. She's got to come back, so I feel like something pretty dramatic does need to happen, and I know we've had something this episode, and it's like, well, what more do you want, Boba? Rick's been carted off into jail for all we know, but I do feel like we don't really care too much about his uncle. Obviously, Rick went pretty far, but that's not a big impactful emotional punch to me, seeing the uncle be beat up. I understand that I feel bad for Rick right now with the Eclipso trolling that put him in that position, but I do feel like something bigger needs to happen. Where's the pack-a-punch that would have happened by now at this point in the season? Maybe they are saving the best till last, but we're gonna have to wait and see. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, guys. Leave a like on this video if you did enjoy it. I do encourage you to subscribe, maybe turn those notifications on and set them to all as well to never miss out on a future video of mine on this channel. If you want to stay up to date with me further, you can do so through following me on Twitter. The links are always in the description, in the top pinned comment. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow starlings in the next video. Goodbye.